Okay, good afternoon. Good afternoon. Welcome to our ConTech Wednesday webinar. My name's Clive Snell. I'm the MD of ConTech.Live. I'm delighted to welcome Tommy Doyle, who's joining us. He's a former scientist, consultant, STM publishing veteran, and he also works with some really interesting tech startups, disruptive tech information startups. Today, we're going to ask the question, is putting the content consumer at the center of information product really that important? And there's a very good reason for that, which I'll talk about in a second. But first, the way this is going to work is basically Tommy and I are going to have a conversation around the subject. And then that will last about 20 minutes. And by all means, please do file Q&A in the box on the right, and we will get to those. And then the whole thing wraps up at the very latest, 5 p.m. BST, 12 p.m. Eastern time, so you can get on with the rest of your day. So the reason we're asking this question is that one of the themes, core themes for ConTech this year is that publishers and information providers should be putting their users at the heart of their products. User centricity, putting the user right in the middle of the product, is very, very important, a development given technological business model changes. Tommy has the question, so is putting the content consumer at the center of information products really that important? So let's just open up the conversation. I guess the starting point, Tommy, is how do you define user experience?
Okay, well, Clive, thanks so much for inviting me today, and it's great to be back in ConTech. Yeah, user experience, for me and for many, it's all about how a user interacts with a certain product or service. It's about how a person feels about that experience, how useful is it to them, how easy is it to use, and ultimately, whatever job they're trying to do with that product or service, I think that the product manager should always be looking for a combination of outcomes like happiness and joy, real emotional responses. Are they saving time? Are they saving money? Are they getting better results and outcomes as a result of using that product or service?
Do you think that publishers have always had that in mind, or do you think this is something which has kind of evolved in recent years?
I think it's evolved in recent years. I mean, people have seen design-led or user-led companies in the consumer space continue to do really, really well. I mean, everybody loves how their iPhone box opens up, and that's been a designed experience. And a lot of I'd say traditional publishers have been very much more on the B2B side. It's been about building products that librarians will buy that will later serve their end users. There's a break in the chain in terms of who you're really trying to solve a problem for, because the main economic actor and buyer has been a librarian, and librarians, may not be the best user-centric design experts. That's not what they're trained to do. Their job is to aggregate and provision content. So I think there's been a macro theme or trend around a shift to more user-centric design, user-centric products, and that's been inspired by some great platforms and products out there. But I think also the publishing industry is kind of catching up to that because of their nature of the way the economics and the whole vendor-librarian relationship worked in the past.
Yeah, when we talk a lot about the transformation, and a lot of these transformations, especially on the UX side, are driven by just the immediacy with which you can find data from or information from Google and the like. And obviously in the scholarly world, it's really not quite as easy as that. Tell us about your connections in the STM and broader information industry. Why is this a thing for you?
Yeah, I mean, so I've been in and around the STM industry for an information service for a long time. I mean, I started my career as a chemistry researcher. So I actually wanted to be a researcher. I wasn't a very good researcher, so I ended up moving into consulting and corporate finance, and I spent a lot of time in usual finance kind of industries, pharma, but later information and media industries. I naturally then found myself drawn to the STM because it was an amazing combination of science, research, and impact, as well as bringing the power of information to those users, which I used to be one. Later, I moved into what I call more technology and product roles at the world's largest information aggregator. And since then, I've actually been more and more involved in what I call leading edge or bleeding edge type companies in the sci-tech, ed tech, and also in the fintech areas. It's really interesting, while the sci-tech, fintech, ed tech sounds pretty broad, they all have quite a lot of similarities around how they solve use cases or go about solving problems for their end users and customers. So they're leveraging data and AI tools. They're often building marketplaces and communities to leverage those. And they're all very, very much focused on solving a well-defined problem.
I think it's really interesting. I mean, I was a B2B publisher, God knows how long ago, and over 30 years, we've clearly seen an enormous amount of change, an enormous amount of transition. And, just simply taking technology roles inside information organizations is relatively recent. They didn't used to have technologists. They had editors and publishers and people who positioned stuff. I think we've witnessed a lot of that, which is why we're very, very driven in ConTech to explore that more and more and more. So let's get to the crux of the question. Why do you ask, what is reader experience really that important? Yeah,
so I mean, when I put that up, I got a lot of flack from my friends in the product space, and they say, surely you don't mean user experience is important. And I said, no, user experience is really important, critical for all the reasons we talked about. But I think the way the publishing industry and the whole SEM industry, a lot of it is they're still very much defining it just as reader experience. And my argument is that that's only one context and you're missing a bigger picture. I mean, again, a lot of publishers, given their current situation and their context, they equate user experience to the reader, and that is for many, like we talked about, a big shift. They've been very much focused on serving librarians, the buyers of this, and they need to make libraries more relevant. They need to and more useful, and they need to reach out to those end users. Obviously, also with the big and continuing shift to open access. The importance of an author as an economic actor becomes more and more important. So there is a lot of draw and need to go to that user experience. But again, authors, readers, that is just a piece of the evolving landscape. And I'd argue that there are other contexts and other channels that need to be looked at and seriously considered as publishers evolve into the future.
Why do you argue that?
So, yeah, I mean, so taking it from a macro level and going even further back from, the person in front of the screen, you're thinking, where are users spending their time digitally, and what's the context? Yeah. A lot of people are discovering information through a lot more different channels than before. I've been a huge fan and supporter of the research collaboration networks for a long time, the ResearchGates, the academia.edu, and others. There's others in the edtech space that emerged that I'm advising. And the context they're building is very different from the traditional search, view, print. A lot of the way that these publisher websites and platform aggregators, it's simply based on that model. But the way that people learn and consume and work information is changing. People are looking to collaborate more and work in more collaborative ways. Obviously, COVID has been a huge boon for collaboration software like Zoom and Microsoft Teams and Box and all that kind of thing. And people like to work with net experts. One of the companies I'm advising right now have realized that learning is a team sport. And so they allow people to form communities and ask for help and set challenges and relate to challenges. And it's not just looking for content, it's all the other stuff that goes around that. Yeah. And I think what's also feeding a lot of this is much more greater levels of personalization. So these meta platforms, because people have been there for a lot longer time and they're doing a lot more type of activity on that platform, you can get there's a lot more digital fingerprint or exhaust coming off. And so higher levels of personalization than any single publisher can do alone. So I think playing a role in those broader landscapes is something that a lot of people really need to embrace, and some cutting edge publishers are cutting syndication deals with these. So I think there's going to be a lot more content syndication, and people need to really think about content syndication, particularly if their job now as open access publishers, their job is to really make sure that their author's work travels far and wide and is useful.
Yeah, interesting. So where are the users spending their time digitally? Where, you know, what context? Examples? Have you got specific examples?
Well, I mean, like the one I was just saying is with Booklick, people are going onto this website. A lot of the content is fed up from library platforms onto it, but people are going there and they're looking to do projects together, or they're looking to find something that's not on their reading list, but they want to follow someone to see what they're doing. So if you want to understand something, rather than going to book, you ask someone to help you. And so I think the sort of use case or context is people looking to team up to do work or to learn. And I think those are, and you can see in the traffic. So, you know, I recommend anybody go to SimilarWeb and look at some of these meta platforms against the more traditional aggregators or publishers, and it's factors of in terms of usage and engagement. And this is where people are spending their time.
And more and more, there seems to be a shift towards data tools and things of that sort.
Yeah, I think that's the other sort of critical context that we need to be thinking about as an industry. And you know, so data tools and service companies, you know, the API economy is blown up so many other, or disrupted and changed so many other industries. FinTech, another one that I'm working with, where data is made and stored and where data is used and leveraged are separated. And so the whole move into tool-based workflows and getting data pushed into those workflows has given birth to companies like Square, which has been a huge success, which is now becoming a bank in its own right. But I think also this kind of data economy starts to create new markets for publishers. Mm-hmm. So it's not necessarily about replacing the read use case, because I think we're still going to want to read and all that. I think that's going to be much more augmented. So people simply don't have the time to read everything that's coming out. They're going to need to have tools to extract features and label and form grids and do analysis, rather than trying to, you know, create those spreadsheets like I used to do in the lab all those years ago off papers. But the new markets out there, you know, the investment community here in Boston, there's a very rich biotech and VC community, and they have to make very, very big critical decisions in a short amount of time. And for them, it's interesting. I was speaking to a friend who runs a biotech this last week, and he said, I just want to get everything that's available. I want to create one body of knowledge on this specific gene. I don't want a publisher, a journal, an aggregator, a database, or a librarian curating it for me. I want to machine out this one gene, and I want to investigate it, and I want to understand all the supplemental data around it, so I can make that very important due diligence decision. Certain hedge funds are operating on this, crawling the clinical trial information or the latest literature. Again, they're not defined by a publisher or by a journal or any kind of curation aggregation, but they do need access to that. And these people are willing to pay, because these are very high, valuable, important decisions. You know, we're also seeing the evolution of many prediction markets or prediction platforms. And a lot of these rely on pretty diverse sets of longitudinal data. And again, this is a new type of revenue stream or a revenue channel, which publishers wouldn't even think about, but could play a really important and should play a really important role in the future.
So I think that's what makes it particularly interesting, and very much the ConTech agenda is, you know, this is we have organizations, long established organizations with huge swathes of information that can be broken down and cut and sliced and diced and consumed in a variety of different ways, as long as they embrace that. And that's the kind of the big opportunity. And I'm very interested to know if we could ever research that to see where everybody or where all the major players are in the line. Looking on a more negative side of it, what do you think are the barriers to doing this properly?
Yeah, and there's a couple, and again, some of them are technical, some of them are more business, or some of them even psychological, cultural. I think, you know, some to many publishers, this is about getting access to a new market or buyer, and that's always difficult. It's expensive, and it takes time. And a lot of people in this industry are very much, because of all the fluctuation, change, and transition just to open, everybody's got the eye on the ball there, and people can be quite short term. So I think there's also, alongside that, there's this cultural, I don't know, what's the word I'm trying to say? Let's just say there's this behavior, there's this traditional cultural behavior of needing to have and own all of these relationships up to the user.
It's a control kind of,
yeah, and again,
control thing.
Yeah, and again, this is an industry that's made money historically on supply, limiting supply, controlling supply, monetizing supply. And you know, it's obviously one of the most, if not one of the most, if not the most profitable industry that's ever existed. But the cost of entry can be very high, and I think that's kind of a chicken and egg bit of a problem. I think on the relationship status of some of these companies is also on the defense. So again, I'm doing massive generalizations because there are some companies that have actually gone out there and cut deals with the large research collaboration networks and are already doing content syndication, or getting GED results, and already driving traffic and usage and discoverability of their content. But there are simply that say we're not going to do, and we're actually going to sue them. So I think it's fair to say what the industry is A or B. I think there's a range of behaviors. So I think that's driving it, certainly. I think also technology shifts. Obviously, the largest publishers, they have APIs, they do XML, they have a certain level of AI automation, but a lot of publishers don't. So actually being technically feasible to do that. And again, everybody's focused on, you can imagine everybody's focused on what the front of the screen looks like, but there's a lot of other infrastructure that can go on to help drive that data, your participation in the data economy. And I think finally it's going to this need to control or need to supply. It's also taking a view of business models in a different way. So data as a service, marketplaces, channel partnerships, given that access to markets and new buyers is a challenge, I think people need to be more open about strategic partnerships or playing in the data marketplace game or the content syndication game. And so I think those are kind of barriers that publishers need to overcome.
Interesting. Before we move on, there's a question in the Q&A which I think relates to something you said earlier, which I think I'd like to explore a little bit more. It's from Mark Alcock. Hi, Mark.
Hey,
Hi,
Mark.
Tommy.
Oh, he's a good friend.
Are you saying that the job of curation is shifting from the representatives of the academy, librarians, to individuals? But if so, individuals are usually aligned with some form of host institution. If so, do the needs of the hosts outweigh the needs of the individual? Good question, Mark.
Mark, oh, as always, I'm really glad Mark dialed in. He always asks a zinger of a question. I'm going to think about this. Well, I think it's very difficult. I think the way that people aggregate and create information will become a lot more easier to do on the fly. I think right now the use case that I was describing was a CEO of a biotech and a partner of a venture fund. And so they had a very specific use case, and so they're not really tied to an institution, as I think Mark would be describing an academic institution. But I think even within an academic institution, people are going to need to cut and slice and dice and curate information based on their needs. And I think it's going to be very, very hard to put standards in around in any way. If you take one chemistry department, they'll be solving different problems, they'll be looking at different things, and they'll need to curate in different ways. Yes, maybe standards around labeling modeling environments, maybe, but I think it's ultimately going to move into more individual, because that's where the greater impact is going to be. The more finite you can structure and curate, the better you can drive a model and get better outcomes.
And I think in many ways, with all of these tech changes and revolutions, everything does become more personalized, more individualized, with greater potential, I think. And he's come back. Well, any institution really. In other words, who is the content consumer, the researcher or the host? We'll just have a chew on that one, and then we'll get back to the discussion.
The host. I don't know what he means by the host.
Okay,
so,
well, maybe he'll add a little bit.
Yeah,
of
Mark, if you could just let me know what that. I can't see the chat, unfortunately, mate. So anyway,
that's my job.
Keep it going.
When we took let's consider the publishers make these dramatic moves, and they start to be seen as pure data suppliers. What opportunities, alternatives are there for them to grow? Where do you see that developing?
Yeah, so I don't think being a pure data supplier is necessarily a bad thing. There are some incredibly successful companies that have made huge amounts of money supplying data into models. Lots of examples in the financial markets and B2B, healthcare, clinical, all that stuff. There's some incredible amounts of value still in data supply. But I think, basically what we've talked about today, I think there's still a lot to be played for in content syndication. Either making your service to an author or to the research that you're publishing travel further and be more useful. And I think there's a big play, and you'll start to see more emergence of data exchanges and platforms focused on this space rather than the sort of standard AWS or Snowflakes that are out there. I think, stepping from that broader out there view, I think there's still some great plays that people can play. As costs and pressure start to come down, as we move from subscription to open, larger publishers or aggregators could start looking at the scale play. So taking the back office out, if that's not strategically absolutely differential for a publisher or important, going to someone who does have that and renting it. So renting the stack, and we've seen that in technology as more and more components on the B2B stack, as more and more services get componentized, people just pick and choose best of breed. And I think there could be an element of that, and publishers or published service companies can play a role. I still, going back to, authors are an important economic actor in this system. And so and these relationships really matter. So thinking through what services a publisher that can bring to those authors at scale that can really solve an important pain point, whether that's researching, writing, distributing, or promoting. And again, we're already seeing components emerge, or businesses serving different parts of those components. Could a publisher play a role and transform into one of those? I still think, there's lots of different levels from a data feed. You can have your basic PDF, you can do some work and make it into XML, but particularly the specialized societies, there's a lot of value in terms of labeling and enriching content. I know what you can say about few shot, long shot modeling, but having things really labeled and treated in the right way can significantly reduce time and compute costs downstream. And those types of services. So rather than having vocabularies that stick on a database for read-only purposes, I think these vocabularies will serve a whole new set of customers and use cases in the machine learning aspect. One thing that's also going on the sort of learned society, one thing that I've seen a lot in more traditional media companies is the role and the increasing importance of swing around communities. So we all know, the GLGs and those types of people who've made millions, hundreds of millions in forming expert networks. But there are businesses out there that are forming advisory councils. The biggest example is the Corporate Executive Board, but forming advisory councils, pay to participate membership organizations, and ultimately facilitating those really, really high value, one-to-one, very specific conversations. People have made very successful businesses out of those in other industries. And I think we could start to see some more. And I think finally, I mean, going back to the importance of user centricity, if someone really does have that deep intimacy with a community, with a user, with a specific problem, there may be opportunities for specialized swims upstream into actual creating tools and services for specific problems for that research. And again, whether you do that through venturing, partnering, or even developing your own capabilities to do that, there are a lot of different options and ways that you could play that game as well.
So the interesting thing with, I mean, there's a huge menu of opportunity, really. I think that that is the thing that really fascinates me about this whole thing. And in many ways, there's almost an event discussion in each of those areas, and find the subject matter experts, and anyway, let's not get too carried away.
Right to the next ConTech.
Yeah, that's ConTech. Mark came back and he said the host institution he means, e.g., academy or hedge fund or startup. So I think he's basically saying, do the needs of the host outweigh the needs of the individual? I think that's what he means. And the institutions being those. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think maybe Mark's getting the separation of the individual versus the firm argument, which is a big argument right now that economists are raging with the gig economy and all that kind of thing. It's hard. I don't know how to answer this one, Mark, straight off the bat. I'm going to think
that's a whole extra event as well.
But I think ultimately, host institutions have to allow people to be successful. And if they can allow high levels of personalization and specializations in a scalable way, then ultimately that will be successful. So I think the need of the individual unit probably outweighs the need of, will ultimately win over the need of a standardized institution.
Sure.
So I'm going to bet on personalization.
Yeah, I think I would back you on that every step of the way. We are very nearly out of time. Great conversation. I think we've raised at least 10 times as many questions as we started with, which is always good for stuff like this. Tommy, I'd just like to thank you for the time you put into this and the really terrific discussion I feel we've had. We will have, as I say, a recording of this online tomorrow in the webinar section of ConTech.Live.com. A big thank you to Tommy. Thanks for attending, everyone. Couple of quick plugs. We've got a fabulous online-only event scheduled next Tuesday. There's still room to get on that. We've got 11 fantastic sessions. That kicks off at 1 p.m. BST. And that can be registered at ConTech.Live.com. Do join us. That will be held on this event platform, but opened up with networking and all sorts of other interesting things. And finally, a plug for the main ConTech, which we are scheduling 16th, 17th of November. And that will be a in-person event in London and an online event at the same time. Hybrid, blended, combined, whatever you want to call it. We're working hard on that, and we will have a program out on that in the next 2 or 3 months. So finally, thanks once again, Tommy. Excellent show. We look forward to greeting you all to other ConTech events in the near future. Otherwise, all I've got to say is goodbye and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks, Tommy. Goodbye.
Thanks, Clive. Thanks, Mark.
Cheers.